Chapter 1. Paradise, Pennsylvania. Alles ist fix und fertig. Bishop Jacob Weaver clasped Samuel Fisher's shoulder and gave it a squeeze. Samuel, who stood on his front porch with a few others from his community, gripped the railing so tightly his fingers ached. The last few days, and even now, he'd felt as if he were walking through a thick fog, barely able to hear what anyone had said to him. Yet the truth of the bishop's words, that all was completely done, slammed into Samuel with the force of a tornado. Overcome with emotion, he could barely manage a nod. They had just returned from the cemetery where they'd buried Elsie, his wife of 10 years. He wasn't sure how he'd made it through the last couple of days, much less the funeral and graveside service, but frankly, he was too tired and too numb to care. Somehow, he was now expected to carry on without her, and that thought was overwhelming. Samuel's mind hadn't rested since that awful day when he'd found his wife at the foot of the stairs. Over and over, he kept asking himself, "How do I go on? How can I survive without my Elsie?" With his feelings so raw, he couldn't imagine where to begin. Constant thoughts and plaguing questions drained every bit of his energy. Samuel realized he wasn't the first person to go through something like this, but even knowing that, all he felt was despair. The misery was more than he could bear. Well, he couldn't do it. The thought of caring for his and Elsie's 4 children and going to work every day was too much to think about. But if he didn't work, who would buy food and pay their bills? And if he stayed home from work and wallowed in self-pity, he'd only be reminded of Elsie. Everywhere he looked, he would see her face, in the kitchen where she prepared their meals, in the yard where she'd worked among the flowers, in their bedroom where she would take down her hair at night and allow him to brush her long, silky tresses as they discussed the day's events and all their plans for the future. A future that would no longer include his beloved Elsie. I'll let you visit with your family now, but please remember, you can call on me or any of the ministers in our church if you need anything. Oh, and no matter how sad you feel, take the time to read God's word and pray, because being alone with God is the only way you will find the strength to press on. The elderly bishop, who'd been a friend of the family for a good many years, gave Samuel's shoulder another firm squeeze and walked away, leaving Samuel to his disturbing thoughts. Was it only last week that he and Elsie had discussed the approach of Thanksgiving and the huge meal they planned to have? They'd smiled and laughed as they'd reminisced about last year's holiday with their children and several of Samuel's family members sitting around the table. Elsie had commented on how she loved to watch the children's eyes grow big as saucers when the mouth-watering turkey, almost overflowing the platter, had been set in the middle of the table. All the laughter and chatter while they'd enjoyed the holiday feast was a special time for them as a family. Abruptly, those holidays, and everything else Samuel and Elsie had shared, had come to a halt. How quickly things could change.